My name is Lauri Hennessey, and I am coming to you from Vashon Island, which is near Seattle. And I met Bryan in 1984. That was a long time ago. We were friends when Madonna came on the scene, when Bruce first sang about being born in the USA. Bryan and I worked at the UW Daily together. In fact, I remember dancing with Bryan and a bunch of our friends at a party as September played. So that was perfect when you started this with September. I know it's a song he loved. My memories of Bryan are mostly about him carrying 100 camera bags behind him at the Daily. I remember his laugh, which I always found to be a bit maniacal, almost with a bit of an evil genius feel to it. And I remember him talking a lot about Germany. In fact, that's why at the Daily we called him the Wall. That was his nickname because we thought it was so cool. He had been in Germany. Every time that he would hustle into the newsroom with camera bags flying in all directions, we all would cue each other and yell, "Wall!" really big. And there's a lot of graffiti still at the UW Daily about the wall, on the walls at the Daily. And Bryan went back, I think, a year or two ago and took some pictures and did a little memory lane trip, which there was a photo shown earlier in the slideshow about. Of course, the fact that he was a big guy made the nickname kind of perfect. He went on to be the editor later after I left the Daily, and everyone describes him from the old days as charismatic, inspiring, and extremely motivational. One of my classmates from back then shared a story about Ben Linder. He was a 1983 UW graduate who was killed by the US backed guerrilla fighters in Nicaragua. Bryan was the editor, and the rest of the team were able to reach someone on site in Nicaragua for an interview and crank out a cover story overnight. The next day, they learned that the little UW Daily had scooped the entire national media on the incident with Bryan driving it. Bryan visited me once in DC when I lived there 30 years ago. I think he might have been in Myrtle Beach at the time. I know it was before he lived near DC. And he and I were walking down the mall. He was carrying about 1,000 cameras. And I remember he just kind of shook his head and said, "This wouldn't be so bad working here." He'd had a big grin on his face. And of course, he laughed. And I just had no idea that he would end up being there and doing so much and knowing so many people and making so many important changes. The years flew. We drifted a little bit, I think, just because our lives are busy. And I hate how that happens with old friends. But I'm so glad we reconnected a few years ago. And since then, we mainly talked about politics, vented, but also a lot about kids. He felt such pride as a dad. And when Jackson found his voice in protest, Bryan was just constantly texting, here's a link to another interview he's doing. My son actually got kind of sick of it because I would go to my son and say, "You have to be protesting more. Look at my old college friend's son." Um, it was really wonderful to watch from afar. And on Bryan's advice, my son now attends Temple. So we were choosing between two schools, and I texted Bryan and said, "My son's trying to decide about whether he should go to Temple." And he said, "What's the main thing he's deciding?" And I said, "He's grown up in an entirely white island and it bothers him. And he wants to go somewhere where he'll actually experience a bit of diversity in his life." And Bryan said, "Send him here. Not only will he experience some diversity, but I'll become a black friend for him." And they kept meaning to meet together. And I really was excited about having lunch with Bryan when I got back to visit Will. And we ran out of time. So every person from the UW Daily chapter of Bryan's life thinks of him with such pride as our old classmate who made it big. And we're all just incredibly proud of the wall. And I'll miss him. Thank you.